Hey everyone, this is Adam Elenbaas from Nightlight Astrology, and today I am joined by my co-hosts Alexandra Blair and Whitney Kranz to discuss the astrology of October, including our big solar eclipse that's starting the month off. So we're going to be giving a little special attention to that eclipse today, and then we'll be looking at several different periods in the month that are really busy with a number of important transits. And as we go, we will be each offering our reflections and ideas about what you may see this month of October. And don't forget, we always offer a monthly overview where we sort of take a look at the whole month and all of the major transits and focus on which ones we think are the biggest. We also do horoscopes. Dana and Alex and I, another set of co-hosts, break down your whole sign horoscopes. So those are also coming this week. You can check those out and get a little bit more personalized take on the solar eclipse by your sun or rising sign. I also am going to be joined this week by Raphael from Radiant Reality Tarot. He is a tarot reader with a big astrology or a big YouTube audience, and he also does astrology. He was an alumni of the Nightlight program, and he will be coming on to also do some tarot card pulls for all 12 signs, and we'll be doing almost like a second horoscope reading for everybody on Wednesday. So we have a lot planned for you this week. I'm really excited about it. But today, obviously, we'll start off by just taking a look at the whole month of October. So that's our goal for the day. Before we get into it, don't forget to like and subscribe. We passed the 70,000 subscriber mark. That was amazing. Thank you, everybody. I was thinking it would take us a lot longer. I think we crossed the threshold like within 4 or 5 days of the fall equinox. So, wow, that was pretty cool. Anyway, let's keep it up. If you are new to the channel, I hope you will subscribe and help us build our business and community. You can find transcripts of any of these daily talks on the website, of course, which is nightlightastrology.com. I am in promotion mode for our fall program, the first year class, Ancient Astrology for the Modern Mystic. If you go to the courses page, click on the first year course. Begins November 16th. Our early bird registration sale is available until October 15th, so you have a little bit of time to save on the cost of the course. The sale ends again on October 15th. There's also need-based tuition assistance. So if you're someone who would like to come and study ancient astrology in an amazing group setting for a year via live webinar, you can also follow along with the recordings if you can't attend the live webinars. You are welcome to use these special rates and also the need-based tuition assistance, which allows you to set a price within a sliding scale. So please do check that out. Apply for it. Tell us your situation. We'll give you a sliding scale to work within, and you can set your own price for your budget. We do that because we want to make sure that people who are hurting, whether you're on disability or you're a single parent or you're just on a fixed income and you can't go into great debt doing something like studying astrology, we get that. We want to make sure that studying something like astrology is really accessible for people. So check that out. And afterward today, when I sign off, there's an informational video you can watch about the program. So if you stick around after our content for the day, there's an informational video that will tell you all about the program in depth. On that note, I am very excited to bring my co-hosts back and start our exploration of this month's astrology. Whitney and Alexandra, hi, welcome back.
Hello, thanks for having us back again.
Yay. Yay. How was September for you guys?
Man, I don't know, guys. This was a tough one.
Yeah.
October really is spooky season, but this started to get a little spooky, at least for me.
Yeah. Mars and Cancer hit pretty. I feel like the transition of Mars into Cancer hit pretty hard for a lot of people I was working with in my own family. Like, entered my third house, saw some stuff come up with my sister. Like, was like, wow, this is coming on strong. It's obviously September was eclipse season too, though. So we did have an eclipse in September that made it spicier as well. But it's just like there's just been intensity that has come up, not surprisingly, with a bunch of planets going into water signs too.
Yeah, absolutely. I think the Mars and Cancer came in a way that people were not exactly ready for. And I think it's a good reminder that the moon is ruling that and is moving every day and changing and lighting up new parts of that transit every day. So I guess it's a good time for people to start tracking astrology every day if they aren't already doing that. Look where the moon is every day. See what's going on between now and April.
Yes. Yeah. You have. Oh, go ahead. Go ahead,
I
Whitney.
was just going to say the astrology is certainly astrologying. Like this month, particularly, just felt really, really loud. And I know I found myself almost getting swept away by these really big feelings around the both new moon in Virgo and the Pisces eclipse, but then totally distracted by everything happening in Mars and Cancer. So we're just going through it.
I thought it was interesting. Like Mars is in Cancer in my third house, and two things immediately in my immediate everyday environment that got totally jacked up. They're doing some kind of construction work on the road in my neighborhood. So there's like a closed road and we have to take a detour to like just get out of our neighborhood. And then the gym that I go to every like 6 days a week, that they are reconstructing the Lifetime Fitness, and they're going to be closed for like 2 months. So now I have to drive, and which is like fine. It's really close to my house. So this is kind of inconvenient for me because now I got to drive a long ass ways to another one of the Lifetime Fitnesses because they're reconstructing the gym. So I was like, wow, that's interesting. It's very Mars and Cancer in the third, providing like some inconveniences in your neighborhood. You know what I mean?
Yeah. My moon is at 1 degree Cancer. So I was like, oh no, like some bad things might happen to me. No, I'm the bad thing. And I happened to other people for like a full week. I was the bad thing being so mean. Yeah. And my partner is a Cancer rising. So I was like the monster in his first house for a few days, but we're working through it. But I thought it was interesting. I shared on Instagram just a Mars and Cancer artist that I really admire, Ai Weiwei, and he has natal Mars and Cancer. And this month he had some pieces on display. One of them was a very beautiful, he works a lot with his like Chinese ancestry. And so he made this like beautiful porcelain sculpture out of like quote unquote China porcelain. And it was smashed. Somebody came in and smashed it on purpose, like in a totally martial act against him. And it happened like this month. And I was like, wow, that's loud.
Yeah. That I saw that you posted that on Instagram, right?
Yeah.
That was such an interesting, I mean, sad story and very reflective of the astrology, right? Yeah. That was like spot on. I found it really interesting.
He's going to make something of it. It's not that sad, but yeah.
yeah, of course, that's what makes him special, right?
Yeah.
I thought it was really interesting as an avid sports fan and like consumer of a variety of different sports podcasts that there, some of the things that I heard some journalists writing about was the performance of underdogs doing really well in the NFL to start the season. And underdogs, I think, defined by like the Vegas spread or something like that. And I was like, isn't that fascinating that there is this empowered place for underdogs, which if you remember back when we were talking about Mars and Cancer, I said one of the things that's really unique about Mars and Cancer is the way that it will sometimes tell the story of heroic underdogs. Like both of the bodybuilding coaches that I've had who were at champion levels, Olympia, Mr. USA, they both have fallen Marses, and they had these stories of being really scrawny and feeling sort of picked on when they were younger. And I just thought it's just really interesting how Mars and Cancer will sometimes empower teams or athletes that actually on some level look like they should suck, but then they don't. And so that to me has been something in my side hobby that has been interesting to track. But yeah, there's also been like, I would say another really interesting thing for me to track has been the recent entrance of Venus into Scorpio toward the end of September. That transition also being hosted by the Mars in Cancer has been nice. And I don't know, it's been really spicy as far as I've noticed. What about you guys?
Well, I was just going to go back to the sport thing and say that it makes perfect sense then that the Vikings are currently 3-0.
That's right. It's so fascinating though, Whitney, because it can also, like that same Mars can also in its debilitated condition can talk about lowly things rising up because the planet that's fallen has nowhere to go but up. But it can also talk about complete collapse. Like, for example, our Minnesota Twins, their demonstration, is they're just like completely falling apart at the end of the season. And that's also such a Mars and Cancer theme. Anyway, it's just funny to me that you just have these like extreme things about weakness and or ineptitude and then like overcoming weakness and stuff like that. So
that was such a Jordan Love getting injured. And then our backup actually we're actually making it happen. All right, love that. So,
exactly. And we play you guys tomorrow, so
Good luck.
May the best team win.
The famous rivalry.
May the best underdog prevail.
Yeah, the underdog bowl of the year.
For those who don't know what we're talking about, we're talking about the Vikings and the Packers.
Let me tell you, no, I worry about Jordan Love because, I mean, just as a side note, like as someone who has that Saturn in Aries in his chart.
Yeah.
And with Mars in Cancer right now, the last thing you would want to do for a Saturn in Aries would be to rush him back early from an injury, because then you're looking at someone it's just like, okay, let's, it's just such a Saturn in Aries thing. Like, I'm not going to be limited by something. I'm going to overcome it. But then in the process of doing that, you make it worse somehow. So I hope, I really personally, as someone who likes him, like as a quarterback, aside from my loyalty to the Vikings, I hope they don't rush him back personally.
Yeah, I think that's actually just good advice for most of them. I thought that same thing. We were talking about Aaron Rodgers earlier. I'm like, why in the world would you? Especially because there's more eclipses happening, and that kind of was related to his injury. But I digress. Yeah. The Venus and Scorpio, I do agree, just to track us along, but it's felt very different. It's felt very nocturnal, and the feeling of the transition of fall, I feel like, is very, very present. The transition to darkness, the dark charismatic pull. It's been very kind of like sexy and nocturnal and dark in a fun way.
Yeah. There's been it's interesting that you mentioned tracking the moon. I feel like that is such a good observation and like a wild card in the mix of what your day-to-day experience of that Mars in Cancer is going to be like.
Right.
And then by extension, Venus, because she's also ruled by the Mars. So it's kind of like the moon is this like hidden indicator that we could be following this month even. I love that.
Yeah. There's a lot of sneaky moon stuff. And when we do, when you're following any astrology media, doing a month ahead overview, mostly not looking at the moon aspects just because they move so fast. It's one day here or there. Most astrology media is kind of looking at how the moon fits into a different narrative. But from now until April, the moon is going to be activating every part of your chart and dispersing that Mars and Cancer energy across everybody's chart. Once a month, it's going to hit different things. So something to watch. Yeah,
it ought to be interesting. We're going to talk more about the eclipse in a second, but it ought to be interesting to see how this month plays out, given that all these watery planets are coming together in a very close to perfect grand water trine. The symbolism of water has already been in the sky with some major flooding stuff. One of our Nightlight staffers, Saffron, she was trying to go on a vacation. There was just like flooding everywhere in Europe where she lives. We've had some hurricanes. I mean, just some of that watery symbolism is just going to grow more intense, and some of it will be like literal, and some people will experience it that way. But anyway, shall I read a few stories from September from all of you before we've said a little bit about our experience? Let's hear from you guys, and then we'll get into October. So I have one story here and I'm not going to share the names of the people who shared these. I had to show you as soon as I calmed down, but the partial eclipse in Pisces is happening a degree away from my natal Saturn. So this eclipse landed close to this person's Saturn in Pisces. I was about to leave my apartment to go pick up some things at the corner store until I looked up and saw a literal dragon's head in the sky with a glowing full moon, as if its eyes were Rahu himself looking down at me. This person has mentioned nothing about taking edibles or anything. So
not like last month.
Natural ability. I immediately took that as an omen to stay inside instead, as anyone would do if a dragon was staring them in the face. Yeah, that's a good point. And good thing I did, because moments later I heard a round of gunshots going off outside of my house, which I may have walked into. Wow. Okay. Yeah. I told Rahu, thanks for saving my life. So
light a candle for Rahu on the altar tonight.
For real. So, hi Nightlight. Hi Adam and Nightlight team. I would like to share a lunar eclipse story for your Grabbed series. This lunar eclipse is taking place in my 8th house, conjoined my natal North Node in Venus. And my grandmother passed away peacefully in her sleep just the day before the eclipse. She was 90, very kind, humble, quiet woman who passed away without causing trouble to anyone. The next day, another relative died. It was my grandmother's niece, who was 75 years old. All my grandma's relatives were gone, and the only relative was this niece apart from my mom. They called each other regularly on odd days for the past 10 years. Her niece would often send her parcels with snacks. Their relationship was charming and tender. About 2 weeks before that, at the end of August, I received the news from my mom about my grandma suddenly getting very weak and that she might be about to pass. And that night, I had a dream about two beautiful small gray birds flying around me and perching on my shoulder. Just a couple days later, a small gray bird showed up in my parents' garden. I've been following my parents around every day, watching them work with plants. A very friendly, curious, and friendly bird. My dad even took a photo of it, which she attached to her email. Then this bird brought a friend, and now there are two gray birds living in our garden, chirping away and keeping company to my parents. It's quite unusual to see these birds still around in our climate. They would typically fly to warmer countries for winter by now. I keep wondering about the two birds, and then the symbolism hit me. These two beautiful souls departed together. Two wonderful beings chose to leave this place together, supporting each other on their journey to their next destination. So that was her story. Just a beautiful story.
That's beautiful.
Is so beautiful. And I guess one of the reasons I really love that one is I actually see my grandma come back to me as a cardinal very often, like in those moments of stress. Not that cardinals are incredibly uncommon, but I love that story.
Yeah, absolutely. My partner is a Capricorn rising, so the eclipses are happening in their 3rd and 9th houses. Did I mention they're traveling to consult with some faculty members at an Ivy League university? You can't make this stuff up. Looking at the astrology of it all has me sitting on my floor, literally crying and laughing at the same time. Lucky my partner's also interested in astrology. It definitely helps to joke around about the great quantum clock in the sky that grabs us and drags us along no matter how hard we try to resist. Good point. Good point.
Well said.
And I will say that people sometimes say, like, what do you recommend as who should I date? People always ask that, like, when they're getting into astrology, maybe they're single. And I always say, it doesn't matter what their sign is, just make sure that they're into astrology as well. Not that they have to be like as into it as you are, but make sure they're open to it. Because if you love astrology and you're asking this question, make sure you're not with someone who thinks it's total crap, at least. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
But anyhow, so let's take a look at this one, Mars in Cancer. I just love the description. It's not very far into this Mars in Cancer transit, but the tension has been palpable, and I feel like a disgruntled goblin.
Okay, same. Actually, I think my partner does too.
Oh my god! Yeah, I love that. I've got a Cancer moon in the 10th, and I'm currently a nanny for a few families. In every family arrangement, there's been emerging tensions and conflicts. This person's a Libra rising and typically can be cooperative and decenter my own discomforts. The internal tension has been very loud and almost intolerable. During one of my work days, I was taking the kids to get ice cream. I knew this kid had a pistachio and cashew allergy, so I made to ask the cashier, confirmed that it was good to go. Minutes into eating the ice cream and seemingly really content, he started rubbing his eyes and coughing, then started crying. Seemed like an unusually rapid turn. I somewhat panicked and said, okay, let's go. I picked him up and dramatically hustled down the street to the car where his EpiPen was, though in hindsight, I should have kept it with me. He ultimately had just rubbed dirt in his eyes and was tired and cranky. And I jumped to the worst case scenario. Thank goodness. It's very Mars in Cancer, though. Like, let me immediately jump to the defense of like a child that's I think is dying,
Right. Or just the like fear, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Here. And I think people forget, because like Jupiter is such an amplifier, but the moon can really amplify things in that way too, make any scariness scarier and bigger.
Right. Yeah. Mars went over Mercury in Cancer, which is my 5th house ruler, in my 3rd, and my daughter sprained her ankle. And I was convinced in the first 10 minutes of seeing her in the worst pain I've ever seen my daughter in, that she had like broken her foot. Amputation was incoming. You know what I mean? Like the whole thing just flipped right out. So, but she ended up okay. She was back. It was funny. She got a boot, and she like bedazzled it with like all sorts of shit. It was
that's like, so cute.
She was so nervous to go to school, and then she went to school and got some attention for it. So yeah, it was all
that's
cute.
Oh, that Mars and I'll just add real quick here too with that Mars and Cancer. One of the reasons why it was so distracting for me this month, and I shared this with some Nightlight crew, but my mom went through a breast cancer scare. So I spent like 3 weeks just like sick about my mom having cancer. And of course, I'm looking at her chart and just, not objectively, but absolutely convinced.
Not objectively.
That she's got cancer. I mean, how can it be that it's happening completely opposite her natal Saturn? It's got to be bad news, right?
Yeah.
Well, thankfully, we got the word on Monday that it is not bad news. It's not cancer. It was just a little cyst, and we are in the clear. So,
I'm so glad.
But that fear is real.
It is, yeah. And that's what we say, like, I had someone who got upset when I mentioned mastectomies as one of the most common, like, in worst case, Mars in Cancer things that I have seen over the years of doing astrology. And we had like 3 people write into email or in the comment section of that last monthly video saying they were scheduled to have mastectomies under Mars in Cancer. Obviously, like, mastectomies happen all the time, right? But they have the power that Mars in Cancer placement has the power to signify things that are tender and soft and vulnerable, potentially being under harm or threat, something like that. And so, Cancer is associated with the entirety of a woman's anatomy. And so, like, that whole realm can be part of the tender and vulnerable places that are exposed to something, that's dangerous or threatening. But what's interesting about it is that the threat is often nothing more than a threat. It's as though there's some feature of protectiveness with Mars in Cancer as well that's kind of flies under the radar.
Yeah,
Right.
I have a client who gave me permission to share this story, but she has a late Cancer rising and an early Leo moon. And when I asked her, "Oh, what are you going to be doing later this year?" She was like, "I'm getting a mommy makeover. I'm getting plastic surgery." And I was like, that is exactly Mars retrograde.
Yes.
Over that Leo moon, Cancer rising. I was like, good for you.
Yeah. Even like there was a client that I had, this was a long time ago, who I did this example chart of in a seminar that I taught, where she had breast reduction surgery because, as you guys probably know, sometimes it actually can start hurting a woman's back. This is what the case was for her. And so she had reduction surgery under, I think it was the 2018, I want to say it was the 2018 Mars in Cancer or something like that. But anyway, it's just fascinating all the different ways it can show up. Are you guys ready to jump into October?
Yes.
Yeah, let's do it.
Let's plunge into the darkness.
We are.
Let's go. Okay. Let's see here. All right. We're going to start off, of course, with our solar eclipse, which is the first major event of the month of October. And I am going to, let's see, now if I could find my epic pen. It's hiding.
Oh, no, buddy.
There you are. Okay. So, where did you go? Hold on, guys. Give me just a second. My epic pen it's like hiding from me. It sometimes does this. Like, I'll bring it up and it'll just be like in some corner. Like, why were you over there? I didn't put you there, did I? See, yeah, here it is. It's hiding. Okay, there we go. Okay, now let's highlight this eclipse, which is happening October 2nd. That is Wednesday of this week. And this is a solar eclipse, by the way, that is happening as the ruler Venus is in Scorpio. That spices things up a little bit. And one of the key things we're going to be looking at here is the fact that Venus, as the ruler of the eclipse, is entering into a very close but not quite perfect grand water trine. So that's a big deal. There are a lot of other little features of this eclipse that we've been talking about. So I'm going to hand it over to you guys. What stands out to you about this eclipse, and what kinds of themes come to your mind?
Well, I guess I can start us off. In Libra, this eclipse really feels like we're feeling through and we're leading through what is right and what is wrong for ourselves. And I think it sets this whole tone for the month. There's almost, for me, this like sense of coming of age, right? Like we are yearning for what's next. We're yearning for what's more. And I wonder if we are kind of trying to sort through like what are our higher principles that we are guided toward. I mean, with this whole trine, this whole almost grand water trine happening here, I think it's really interesting too, because we start and end the month in very similar ways. We're bookended by these two grand water trines, Venus, Saturn, Mars in the beginning. And then we'll get to the end where we have a Mercury, Neptune, Mars forming. And so it's a little murky. Like, I don't know if we know exactly where we're going, but we're going somewhere. And all of this water, it just, don't you think it's so emo? Like, I just, maybe it's because I was like listening to some nostalgic tunes while I was prepping my notes, but this whole month just feels like a whole Dashboard Confessional album, you know? It's like one big emo pop punk ballad.
Yeah, I loved that in our notes. I noticed we have collaborative notes that we all share, and I noticed Whitney made a remark about Romeo and Juliet vibes.
100%, right? It's like beautifully tragic. It's the yearning that I mentioned, or like a loneliness and a longing. And when we were prepping ahead of time, I was so excited to share because, you know, as a student, an active student of astrology, I'm reading all the books, right? And so Ren Butler's Archetypal Universe, I picked out a quote that just really, really spoke to me, especially with this Venus trine Saturn. In fact, I think it's in that particular section of the Archetypal Universe. Butler calls this the hell of being unloved.
Oh, yeah.
And doesn't that resonate?
Yeah. Yeah, it does. When I look at this, one of the things that comes to my mind is all of the painful Venus Saturn dynamics that another way that I would put it, because that's definitely that melancholic romantic quality is definitely at work in this eclipse. We've got a Libra eclipse, so it's in Venus's sign. It speaks to like karmic balancing moments in relationships, or almost like a clearing of old cycles around relationships. And then the Venus Saturn dynamic, I think, speaks to the same kind of heartbreak, but the trine implies that maybe this is something that we know is a good thing, even though it's a hard thing. So I think of, for example, when I was in high school, I had a couple of, you know, dating relationships where I just knew that my level of into her was not the same as her into me kind of things. And when it finally comes out and the relationship ends and you go, yeah, I cared more about that person than they did about me, I was right the whole time. It's so painful. And yet there's something that where you kind of feel vindicated. You're like, yeah, I shouldn't do that to myself, you know? And I consider those moments in life, like a similar one we were talking about in Al-Anon, a group that I attend for family members of alcoholics. That's been a big part of my life the past couple of years. We talk about that moment where when someone in your family is an alcoholic and you know they're lying about something, and then they hit that rock bottom and it's visible. The lies can no longer be lies. Everything is out. It's so painful and yet so relieving, because you don't have to doubt yourself any longer, or you don't have to live with the feeling that you're waiting for the other shoe to drop. Now it's dropped. And so there's a sense of relief or release, even though there's pain that comes with it. And I think about that kind of grieving, but positive, maybe like a shift or a closure or a resolution that's like painful, but positive.
Yeah. Wow. I love that we all had this parallel thinking. It's so powerful when that happens, because I went somewhere similar. I was really getting those feelings of self-defense, defending your personal space, defending your soft, defending your dark. And thinking a lot about how the sun in Libra wants to keep the illusion of harmony and peace. And often at the expense of the self. So it really feels like this eclipse is pushing something underground, or like pushing something into the darkness that's kind of being punished out in the open in a way. And like, sort of cornily enough, what I was really thinking of was the TV show Buffy, which I'm watching for the first time.
For the first time?
Yeah.
Welcome.
Thank you. Yeah. But I was thinking about, there's a
I've
few
never
parts
seen
of
it.
that. Yeah. Neither had I.
Sorry.
So I just started watching. But there's so many scenes where she goes home and her mom's like, "You were out late again partying?" And she has to say, "Yep." But really what she was doing was fighting vampires through the night, and like learning maturity, and like becoming a better person, and learning self-defense, and reading books on history. But she has to let her mom think what her mom's going to think about her while she's actually fighting these bad boys of Mars and Saturn. And so a lot of that was kind of coming up because they do have this supportive aspect, right? The trine is an inherently supportive aspect, but it kind of feels like they're supporting in the way where a parent is like, okay, to teach you a lesson, you're going to smoke an entire pack of cigarettes to learn to not smoke anymore. It's like not that supportive. It's like actually a little painful and nauseating. So I just got this sense of something kind of being pushed maybe underground or into the subterranean a little bit.
That taps in. I mean, I see a parallel in the theme I was just describing in terms of like, okay, there's this facade of something that you think it is, or you think it's been. And these watery planets are going to, especially because it's a south node eclipse, which tends in my playbook to bring about the resolution of old cycles, right? So it's like a crystallization of wisdom, often a little painful in the way things get resolved. You're gathering insights. It's a harvesting in Libra. And it is about the appearances of things versus an understanding of what something is in its essence. Like that's always a thing for Libra. If you think about even the picture of the common picture of Lady Justice with the blindfold on, it's like, well, your judgment is coming from, you're holding the scales, you can't even see what's on them. Or like the image of the heart versus the feather. We're not talking about a regular kind of weight, are we? If a heart will always be heavier than a feather. So what kind of judgment are we talking about? It's a different, deeper level of discernment. And this to me speaks to what it looks like it is versus what it really is. And the reckoning emotionally with what it really is compared to what we've been saying to ourselves that it is, or what we've been trying to maintain as an appearance. I love that you use that Buffy example, because I feel like that's such a good example of that same kind of theme, or the same. Yeah. So anyway, I'll stop there. I just love that. We have during the 4th to the 8th, let me just progress us here a little bit so we don't spend forever here. We have between October 4th and 8th, Venus will then go through the trines to Saturn and Mars. And this is effectively the sort of grand water trine period. You could draw this out a little bit more and give Venus a couple more days separating. And certainly as long as they're all in whole sign trines, and we have things like Venus opposing Uranus and Venus trining Neptune and sextiling Pluto and a whole bunch of other stuff coming for Venus, the story's not over by any stretch, but this is a critical period coming right off the eclipse. And the window to pay attention to really is the 4th through the 8th, right after the eclipse. You guys want to add anything to this piece of the month?
Really just that this is all so intertwined. I mean, I really feel like this solar eclipse in Libra is this grand water trine that's forming. I mean, this is what we've been talking about, because Venus and Saturn are rulers of this eclipse. So I think we're right there. We've talked a lot about it. We talked about some of those dualities. And for me, what comes up here is like, is it duty or is it passion? The question of, do I follow my duties or do I follow my passions?
Yeah, Venus during that trine, when she's at 14, Scorpio, that's actually the degree of the last eclipse that we had in the Scorpio series in May 2023. It was at 14. So Venus being right there feels really significant in regards to whatever was going on in that Scorpio eclipse series for people, especially because as soon as that Scorpio eclipse series ended, the Libra eclipse series started. And so those just currents are in communication there. And there's so much weird rulership stuff that Whitney, you're alluding to. Even Libra is the sign of Saturn's exaltation. So there's some overlapping stuff happening here. And I actually think that the next couple days, like the 4th, 5th, 6th, when the moon is in Scorpio, the moon really acts like sort of a buffer, because at that time, the moon and Mars have mutual reception, which is a major bonifying condition for both of them. And by the time the moon moves out, Venus has really separated from Saturn. And so she's in a perfect trine to Mars. And that is just regular old reception, but it still feels a lot sweeter than that grand trine. So I think the moon is kind of got a little bit of a support role right here.
Yeah. That's a nice point to make. Follow the nuances of the moon. For example, you could play with the moon in Sag, right? Now it's in Jupiter's sign, while Mercury is forming a trine to Jupiter. Speaking about what is your truth, I mean, this could be a little period where we're really sort of coming to terms with what's true and real, and sort of adjusting perceptions or something like that. That's an interesting, I mean, you can keep doing that with the moon too, which is what makes it just a fantastic point that Alexandra made about tracking the moon while Mars is in Cancer, especially for the long retrograde. Like, it's a really amazing period to actually learn about that kind of subtle dignity connection. One thing that I wanted to point out here about water, and I said this in a video that I made that'll air, I guess, later this week. I was talking about the Grand Water Trine. And I said, my kids are watching this show right now, and I actually made them watch it because I was like trying to help them select a cartoon to watch on Saturday mornings. They don't get to watch TV for the most part during the week, during school week. But on Saturdays, obviously, we let them watch cartoons and stuff. And I was like trying to help them find something that wasn't like, a lot of cartoons are super violent. They still are. Like, and I'm like, okay, I got to find something. So I was like, you guys, have you ever, you guys want to watch this show? It's called Avatar: The Last Airbender. I don't know if you guys have seen this or not, but like one of my favorite cartoons that I've ever seen. And I actually watched it when I was like 30. Like it's really interesting because one of the reasons I loved it so much is because it's all about the manipulation of the elements. There's these water benders, air benders, earth benders, fire benders. And in order to learn how to manipulate the element, they have to learn the deeper sort of like Tao of the element. And they have to learn it within their character. And I just love the show. It's fantastic for people who out there who want to expose their kids to a little astrology and spirituality while also like an enjoyable kids cartoon. Avatar, love it. Anyway,
very cool.
Water bending. I think that this is also like, I was looking at this water trine and I was thinking like, what does it mean for us to water bend? Like, how do we actually manipulate the element of water? And one of the key things that I took away from that show is that water has so much to do on an elemental level. We think about literal water and then we go, it means emotions. Everything is going to be so emotional. And like, yeah, okay, so there's that. But at a more basic level, and Jung actually talked about it this way as well. And I wonder if that wasn't informed by his reading of, say, the I Ching or something like that. But water in Avatar: The Last Airbender is talked about in certain places as being about environmental and instinctual awareness. For example, when someone walks into a room and suddenly you get a bad feeling. It's not the feeling that's the water, it's the conduciveness or receptivity that you have to recognizing the emotional shift caused by the person entering the room. Right. And I thought that's a really interesting distinction because in a sense, we think about water too much as emotion when on this even more basic level, emotion is sort of the byproduct of this level of environmental sensitivity and responsiveness. And so one of the things I thought about is, what also might be coming to the surface, for example, is things in our environment that we are now, when a grand water trine forms, it's like there's awareness. All of a sudden, you are going to be very aware of things in the environment that have been creating patterns in your life. So water bending in this case might be equivalent to saying, wow, I'm becoming aware of how something is making me feel, about how someone or some environment is affecting me, or my body or my moods or my relationships is being affected by this or that. So one way that I've been kind of having fun with this water trine is by thinking about how a growing awareness of what affects us and how it makes us feel might be at play.
Absolutely. It's like the subterranean well that springs forth, right?
Right. Yeah. So
Absolutely.
we're all going to become water benders is the thing. All right. Well, our next major period that we're going to look at is Pluto stationing direct in Capricorn right around the 11th.
Yeah, this is so interesting because again, the moon is acting a little bit like a buffer, right? You can see if you put it back a couple hours, Pluto stations direct and the moon is right on top of Pluto. Like what's going on?
Ooh,
Like
look at
there's
that.
so much moon stuff happening this month. And I will confess, like I only thought of it because it happened to me when the moon came into that Cancer, and that's where my natal moon is, and obviously Mars is there. Just a 2-day span of like the weirdest little things happening. A balloon popped in my face. I stepped on broken a glass thing and broke it. Like I was like, okay, what's going on? And I pull it up and it's like the moon is activating this. So it's really going to change our felt experience. I love the way you talk about the moon, Adam, but like the moon is really going to bring things here into our material experience.
Yeah. Yeah. The moon as the realm of fortune brings about circumstances that are expressive of some kind of underlying archetypal or karmic themes. It's like now they're manifest. Here they are. I like thinking of the moon like a web weaver who's like taking the archetypal fields and weaving them into material reality.
Right.
Absolutely.
We feel things so much more potently because of the moon, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, I think something that's important and that stood out to me here is that there's a sort of building Plutonian tension, which is, I guess, a little on brand for the Scorpio of it all. But Pluto is going to be activated by a Mars opposition, like 3 Mars oppositions, and then as soon as that's over, there's a solar conjunction, and then there's a Venus conjunction to Pluto in the next 5-6 months. For me, in a mundane way, this is really setting a scene because the US natal Pluto is at 27 degrees Capricorn. So, there's just some mundane stuff going on there. And I think on a personal level, this is super important for anyone who has Capricorn placements or a Capricorn part of our chart, which is all of us, because this Cap part has been going through some Pluto stuff, right, for 16 years. So I think there's a real stepping into reclaiming a little last shred of personal power. And this is really one of those fields of energy that we can engage with intentionally and say, hey, what do we want Pluto to not leave here without? Please take this with you too when you get out of here.
It is definitely a the approaching Mars opposition to Pluto, which we will visit later as well. But like that opposition, right? Just preceding the election is a big deal. Like we don't. You guys know me on my channel. I don't directly report on or try to predict collective, historical, mundane, political stuff. But this is clearly related to some of the cycles playing out in the United States, going back to the Jupiter-Saturn conjunction. We're in the square now. The last hurrah of Pluto in Capricorn with Mars opposing right before the election. I mean, it is a very potent time. This week I'm recording a podcast. I got an invite from a former Nightlight student named Lori Lothian, who has her own, I think her channel is called Lunatic Astrology. And she covers a lot of mundane and collective stuff. And I came on to talk about the Jupiter-Saturn cycle, and she invited me to, I always cast a horary for the election. I decided this year I'm not going to be covering that horary on my channel, just trying to kind of stay true to my brand, But she invited me to share it on an election panel that she's doing. So I'm like, well, if people really want to see my take on the outcome, not hear my personal political bias, but if you just want to hear what I think about the election, you can tune into her election panel that she's doing. But needless to say, one of the things that I was looking at very closely when doing my own little research into, making my prediction, is this Pluto stationing, the Pluto turning direct, and Mars opposing like right at the time of the election.
It's just so well, I'd say it was coincidence, but it's certainly not that the moon is there, just amplifying that too.
Yeah. It's funny because one of the things that I always recommend for people, they're always like, well, how should I take an outer planet stationing direct or retrograde? And I'm like, it's not like Mercury, Venus, or Mars in the sense that those faster moving planets, Mars a little bit different, but for sure Venus and Mercury, when they station, that day or two where it's like stationing and it's just not moving and it's turning, you will feel it, and you will usually see the manifestations of that shift of direction, whether it's delays or just like static in the normal Venus expression or whatever it is. You'll notice it. When it comes to the outer planets changing directions, what I've noticed is it's more like a wave pattern, because they take such a long time to slow down, and then they take a long time to turn and get moving again. That whole like process of the station and direct. Sometimes you get manifestations like on the day. Like I wouldn't be surprised, especially with the moon hitting here, that we see it. But I would also look for the upcoming aspects. For example, a couple days after Mercury squares Pluto, that's going to help reiterate it. Mars opposing Pluto is going to help reiterate it. You'll notice
sun exiting Libra right there.
Right. Hit the square too. And so like just in general, I feel like if you wanted to track the turn of Pluto in your own chart, look at that whole sign house and then give it several weeks and watch those transits to Pluto that keep happening. And those will give you more, usually I think that those will give you more clues as to what that turn is in terms of the circumstances. Because I've just noticed it with outer planets. It usually isn't like a Mercury station day where it's like, my computer's on the fritz, or, like it's a little bit like more, there's a longer, like bigger narrative arc to it usually. Anything we want to add about Pluto stationing direct? Anything else that comes to mind?
I guess the only thing I would add, and I think we covered it too, I mean, with the moon here, of course, yes, but this is happening in Capricorn, in Saturn's sign, and Saturn has been incredibly involved in this eclipse season so far, right? And so I just feel that these stories are really connected here. And just at the most basic level, Alexandra, what you said about being intentional about what you want to leave behind, I think that is so smart. And then also, like, what sort of discipline have we learned? What endurance are we taking into this new chapter, just on a very personal level, right? Like, we've done this work and now we're going to take it forward. I think it all intertwines with this eclipse season.
Beautiful, beautiful point. I have so many clients with Capricorn placements who have just been so atomized by this Pluto transit, and their sense of personal agency and power and their ability to impact the environment has been so fragmented. And so that's something I think anyone with Capricorn placements can and should really think about over the next month. Is like, this is an opportunity for you. This is the last one in our lifetime, for Pluto to be there and for you to kind of hang on and get whatever agency you can back out of this situation.
I will share with you guys something that I think you'll find interesting around this Pluto station moment. So literally, I think it's the day before or the day of the Mars-Pluto opposition that's approaching right after Pluto turns direct. My father, who is a 29 Capricorn rising, will be having a knee replacement surgery. And I'm like, first of all, Capricorn associated with the knees. So I found that really fascinating. There's a number of, I know, right? There's a number of other interesting things that are culminating in his life. I'll keep those private, but it's as though this physiological surgical moment is connected to also the culmination of a long process that we've just been talking about with Pluto and Capricorn for so many years. And yet, here's the interesting thing. This is to throw a little twist in it. He has a blood clot in his lower leg. And so he has had a hard time finding a surgeon that will perform the knee replacement, because it is it's a very risky surgery when you have a blood clot just below the knee you're operating on. So he just said, no matter what, I want to get my knee replaced because I'm not able to walk. So I'm like, oh, this should be interesting. Mars will oppose Pluto while it's on his ascendant, and he's having a very risky surgery on his knee at this time. So I'm like, it was interesting though, because I feel in the way he's approaching the surgery that this represents a shift in what he is seeing as a complete remake of his whole life.
Mm-hmm.
Wow.
And in really, I think, a pretty positive way.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But he's willing to possibly
Go
die.
to those dark Pluto places to
Isn't
get
that
it.
crazy? Yeah. I was like, man.
I
So-
do get it. Yeah.
And here's my question for you then, Adam, because I feel like a lot of us might need to hear this. How are you not freaking out? You know, like I freaked out about Saturn opposing my mom's, you know, Mars in Cancer and all of that, right? There's like this
I know.
astro anxiety that just comes with it.
Well, I'll tell you, I was born with the sun in an applying square to Pluto within 2 degrees. My dad I have gone through my dad's death so many times already. You know, like, and this was the first chapter of the book I wrote, so it's not
Sure.
like this shocking if anyone's read my book, but you know, I came into the bathroom when he was suicidal and had chopped his whole arm up with a knife, you know, and rehab and his mental health falling apart. And, you know, he has just had such a downward spiral of his mental health. And I really see what he went through as generational because he got the crap kicked out of him by an alcoholic father.
Mm-hmm.
So like, I have so much compassion. I've gone through so much healing work with my dad. I was really like literally the topic of my first book. So I get along, my dad and I are in a good space right now, but when I look at everything that's happened, there have been so many times where I thought he was dead.
Yeah.
And so I've had to work through that with the sun Pluto in my chart so many times already that for me, it's like, I just trust that his life is in the hands of the universe and I'm going to love him. And when it's his time, if it's the surgery or whenever it is, I know that it's okay because I've already had to kind of go to hell a few times with him, if that makes sense.
Yeah, that's really profound. Thank you for sharing. And obviously, good luck.
Yeah.
I hope it goes well.
I do too. Well, you know, but the thing that I really wanted to highlight was just that the lengths that we're willing to go to with Pluto to transform when we know it's time.
Exactly.
This is a culminating 29th degree Pluto. Mars is coming. The only downside to this that I could see, and maybe I'm just getting too dark here, is that like when you're in a political season where people are perceiving the opposition as people that need to be overthrown at any cost whatsoever. We already have a few assassination attempts, you know, like that kind of thinking is so malignant and so problematic that what we don't want to see, you want to see, I will be willing to transform at all costs. That's a great impulse with Pluto, in my opinion, just that willingness to go and go into the cave, you know. But when it comes to, I will take power at any cost, or I will win at any cost with Mars opposite Pluto. That's the thing I think we all have to be careful of within ourselves, is like some kind of impulse to transform or get something in a way that's not really healthy for us. And I think for most of us, it's probably, you know, just something like be careful of emotionally coercing yourself or other people, or it doesn't have to be super dramatic. But yeah, when you think about it on the political and collective stage, I get a little bit more worried about it.
I think that I really saw that from the eclipse. Like when I'm talking about things getting pushed underground, I do feel like that's something we should all kind of be thinking of and looking for in our loved ones as well at that time.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, this is an interesting period, no doubt. We're going to move on to our mid-month period, which happens between the 13th and the 17th. What do you guys see during this period that stands out?
Gosh, we've got a lot of loud astrology here. Like,
now we have like an air trine with the moon. Again, the moon playing in.
It's crazy. And I can't help but see all of this, like on the 13th, the big arrow's out.
Okay, come on, big arrow.
Yep, we've got the sun trining Jupiter, we've got the sun squaring Mars, all in the same time that Venus is opposing Uranus and Venus is trining Neptune. This is all happening in the space of like 2 days here, right as we lead up to the full moon, and it's telling this story. And if we were feeling, look at all those arrows on the screen, seriously, like if we were feeling really in our feels at the beginning of the month, like whatever those feelings were about, maybe the ambitions we're bringing forth, just really loud. And honestly, it feels a little reckless to me, or a little frenzied almost, like especially what the sun is doing here, trining Jupiter and then squaring Mars. You know what image came to me as I was preparing? It's like the drive and the ego of The Wolf of Wall Street. Did you guys watch that movie with Leo DiCaprio?
Yeah.
And his like belligerence and mania, you know, like
an inability to like see himself really and see how other people saw him. Yeah.
Exactly. Almost like I could also see this as like starving for an argument, you know, just to break the silence and the emotional heaviness. So I guess in the kind of initial period here, that's what I'm seeing, especially with the sun happening there.
Yeah. This is, I mean, it stands out to me. If we just roll forward to the 17th, we have, and I'm going to take out all these arrows just so we don't all go insane. And how do you survive the anxiety of these transits? I take aspect lines out of the middle of wheels.
Ooh, beautiful.
And I try to stop looking at all the charts. Oh, I'm just kidding. So,
the moon is actually making those squares too. Yeah, I hate to moon you up on it, but the moon is so loud this month. It's crazy.
Yeah, this is within 7 degrees total of a cardinal grand cross, right?
Yeah, but I actually really like this moon in Aries for the mutual reception again. So the moon has some important mutual reception at the start of the month, but the moon in a Mars sign, Mars in the moon sign, actually feels so much nicer than Mars there with no dignity, no reception. So I think there's definitely still stuff building, right? All the other stuff that we're talking about. But I think Whitney's point about the ambition is very clear here. There is some, I mean, Sun, Mars together and then activating Aries through the moon. There is some question of ambition and drive in that way.
Yeah. Yeah, it's funny because you've got an eclipse in a cardinal sign, right? And then there's just there's like a deluge. And I just feel like all these, you know, these watery trines, they don't make you feel like a cardinal eclipse that's like kicking the door open to start some kind of new cycle. But when we get to the full moon, it does.
Yeah.
You get to the full moon, then it's like, okay, I feel like we've seen some kind of emotional, like a very fertile but very gestational place, like emotionally, environmentally, coming off the eclipse. You get into this space, and all of a sudden now it just feels like things are popping, and you got that real cardinal kick that you should feel after a cardinal eclipse. It doesn't come through right away. It seems like it sort of waits to really start blowing up around the full moon.
Yeah, I think so Sun Mars is always pretty ambitious. Again, especially with that Aries activated, but the sun is in Libra. And so again, the one thing I feel about this is there's some like it's like a blocked pore or something, you know, the ability to express as an individual, to put your views and ideas and beliefs and ambitions out there is being punished or blocked in some way that I think contributes to some of the darkening of the year.
That's interesting. I took a similar take, but in a slightly different way. Like as we culminate to this full moon, it almost makes me wonder if we're like a little tired of playing by the rules, so we just like completely abandon them.
Yeah. Mars can be such one of the words for Mars that I sometimes use is like maverick, you know, like I'm just going to do my own thing. And I feel like, yeah, there's, especially if you have the strength of your emotional convictions behind you, right? Then it feels like, I don't know, emotions are such a powerful thing to act on and from for a lot of us. And I feel like Libra is the kind of cardinal sign that starts things, but according to something well crafted and designed, like something that's been architecturally looked over. The lines are all perfect. And I'm just not sure that that plan is the one that gets enacted completely. If the plan in our mind, or the image in our mind, is the one that gets acted upon, as Whitney was saying, we're going to be like feeling some push ambitions that are like driving us. I feel like they could be driven by some need to take greater account for the way we're feeling about things, and let that also modify and speak to the ideal plan that we're laying out.
Yep. Yeah. And, with that, the mutual reception between Mars and the moon here, I think we still have that very emotional tie to whatever is happening here and those ambitions, right? And I guess I would just take a word of warning to direct your aggressions carefully. I think there may be some of this aggression, assertiveness, right, in the air, and there are ways to use that constructively, and there are ways to use that destructively.
That's right. Yeah.
It kind of, go ahead.
No, go ahead.
It reminded me of a song by Ben Folds 5, maybe. Ben Folds or Ben Folds 5, either way. It's called Underground, and it's basically about punk rock kids finding underground spaces where they can actually be themselves. Like, nobody understands, but we can be happy underground. And so that kind of was coming up for me. It's like, okay, the overculture doesn't understand. I'm going to go find my people. And that kind of relates to those scorpionic themes and the plutonic themes. It's just like, okay, I'm going to go find my little space where I can be a freaky punk.
Alexandra's on the emo train.
I am, yeah, fully.
I love it. This is interesting. This is something that I overlooked that's coming to my mind right now. We just need to. Yes. Okay. So let me just find. I want to make sure that I don't talk out of my ass. So give me just 2 seconds here. Where are you? Okay. So the other thing that's really interesting, I just taught a workshop earlier this year on the fixed stars, and there is a really interesting fixed star that is called Vindemayatrix, and it sits at about 956 of Libra. I'm going to bring this into like our full moon space here that we're looking at, but I want to go back first just to the eclipse, and so you'll notice, it's like right there. Mm-hmm. So the eclipse happens at just over 10 degrees of Libra. So, and Vindemayatrix is according to Astrology King, which is a fixed star website, looks like it's around 10 degrees, just under 10 degrees maybe of Libra. So this would be, in other words, an eclipse that is conjoined with Vindemayatrix. One of the names, and I know this is going to sound like, don't anyone go get freaked out, because let me just tell you, if you start doing a little bit of research on fixed stars, everyone's getting their heads cut off.
Yeah, good God.
It's like, but this was a star that was called the Widowmaker, and it was associated with deaths that happen in dramatic fashion, and often that there is a connotation of someone or something being left behind. And that it's sort of like a shocking death where someone or something is left behind. That's why it's called the Widowmaker, but it's not necessarily just associated with the death of a spouse. It has also the connotation of a death that can be somehow like, I'm just going to give you a terrible example, right? But like in the case that someone departs early, it's unexpected. But somehow, let's say there's a really generous life insurance policy that is going to be this kind of silver lining. Right? That's like I've had a lot of clients experience that over the years. So Vindemayatrix also has this association with not just deaths, but losses or difficult things that come. And it's like, wow, wasn't expecting that. And they leave people behind to have to deal with something in a state of loss, but then they also often impart a gift. And so I just thought this is a really specific fixed star. Now, in my experience with fixed stars, not all fixed stars are going to be relevant for all people. It really depends on how things are configured in your birth chart, I would say, first and foremost, right? So, and I also don't want people to get scared, because sometimes this can be very, very mundane. Like you can take it way down from the level of a death, right, to something like your furnace, your furnace dies, but you have a warranty or whatever it's called. So it, like, literally, please don't hear this and get all freaked out.
Your boss quits and you get a promotion.
That's right, exactly. And initially you could feel like you're left with a shit ton of work, and it feels like misfortune, but then suddenly you're promoted from within. So it's that same kind of like kind of a silver lining that comes with a loss that also leaves you feeling like suddenly you have a lot on your plate that maybe someone else had or something. That's an interesting, very specific thing. Anyway, the reason I want to point that out is because, let's go back to this moment. Okay, so here we are at the hour of the full moon. Am I in the right space here? Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay, good. I just almost lost myself. All right. So one of the things that I find to be really interesting about this is that one of the things that's happening like almost right after the full moon, which in many ways what we're saying could be a trigger point for some of the release of the effects of the eclipse.
Mm-hmm.
I was thinking about Vindematrix, and all of a sudden I went, isn't it interesting that at what I consider to be maybe one of the biggest manifestation or release points for the eclipse energy, right at that same time, Venus enters Sagittarius. And one of the things that is associated with Venus in Sagittarius is the being in the sudden receipt of something very beneficial.
Yeah.
And now we have Venus, who rules the eclipse, going from a state of stress and shock right after the full moon into a place where she often receives boons, blessings, and benefits. I just thought, wow, that's really interesting, where I almost want to tell people, like, look, if things look kind of gnarly after the eclipse, and I would watch for like around the full moon and right after the full moon, it's possible that the energy shifts and some kind of relief or help or blessing or something that just makes things a little bit easier starts to come in, because that's kind of the symbolism of a Vindematrix eclipse cycle, as far as I can tell.
Well, that's so interesting. And I have to admit that I was over here Googling Vindematrix, because literally I've never heard about Vindematrix before. So thank you. All sorts of lessons today. But it's so interesting. It goes back to what a lot of your lessons, Adam, even on the outer planets, say, is that like these themes are often echoing each other. You know, we probably don't have to look for every particular fixed star placement, right? But that is present in everything that is happening at the same time as well. And
right.
I'll tell you, I'm looking forward to Venus entering Sagittarius. I love that you used the word relief, because I made one note for this particular movement, and that was sweet relief.
Yeah. It really changes the nature of the month, that transit. It really like takes the difficulty into a different direction. Like things, it moves into that Scorpio Mercury stuff kind of. Relating to the point that you were saying, that's so brilliant. There is, I have a previous data point if anyone wants to dig back in their personal biography, but another one of these eclipses happened at 10 Libra, October 3rd, 2005. So if anyone wants to dig back, you can see another Vindematrix. Of course, the other astrology is quite different. But relating to your point, Adam, I think this is where the moon tracking may really, really, really come into handy if things are still tough for you. And if Mars in Cancer is really tough and the eclipse is happening in a way that feels tough, look for those points in the month where the moon is making things nicer, better, sweeter, buffering. That can really, really help. That means that for the next few months life is going to be happening on more of a weekly basis for you. And so that can help.
You know, it's interesting that you mentioned October. I have to tell you this story because I did not know that. First of all, I did not know that. I love that you're such a data nerd. That is like it. I just love it because you bring stuff up and I'm like, I have a good memory. So as soon as you do, I'm like, oh shit, that's
my favorite thing.
Yeah, that's awesome. So October 2005, you said it was, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, so October 2005. This is literally what happened. It was right before Halloween, so it would have been right after that eclipse, I guess.
Mhm.
I was maybe 6 or 7 months into sobriety, having done ayahuasca in South America as a way of kicking opiate addiction. And so sobriety was brand new for me. And there was temptations to relapse or regress happening quite regularly. And I was doing pretty well. Like I think there was 1 or 2 over the summer where I drank or did some hard drugs or something. And the feedback was like, this is no longer it for me. And so it was all things considered, my path to sobriety was relatively quick, and like I was able to not rebound in any super hard or bad way. But there was this person who I regularly did drugs with who was calling me like quite regularly. And he was a source of temptation for me. And this is going to sound shitty. He died. He died that October. He died of an overdose. And
that
right,
is very on. I mean, the parallels for the discussion we were just having are there.
Yeah. And when I heard that he died, because a friend called me, first of all, I was just heartbroken because it was a friend. And even if we were druggy friends, which is like a weird particular type of friendship, it was still a friend. And he actually fell off a roof while intoxicated. He was so intoxicated with drugs that he fell off a roof and died. And it was terrible. And yet this was a very Vindematrix moment for me, in that this was this terrible thing, and it left a gap in with a friendship for sure. But also the blessing was that my biggest temptation for relapse was no longer a part of my life. And I had such a hard time feeling this weird combination of grateful that I wouldn't have to deal with that temptation, and also horrible because it involved the death of someone that I cared about. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
That was a Vindematrix eclipse that in October. Then that's what happened. Wild.
That's incredible. And I think we're tapping into some sort of oracular magic here. I mean, that was like beautiful.
Literally.
That's what happens when you're like, hey, look at this state where the same thing happened. It's just magical. I love it that you do that research, Alexandra. That's really fun.
And if you guys want to do this kind of research, Adam is currently taking students for his new round of classes.
Yes.
This has all been an elaborate ad.
Come study with us. Yeah, for real.
Yeah.
Well, let's move into our next piece, which is the sun square to Pluto. And by the way, do that work. What I just did, like for some of you, like, remember in my chart also, by the way, I happen to have a planet closely configured to 10 Libra that rules the house of friendships in my chart. So there's a little bit like that's specific, right? So it may or may not show up for you depending on the configurations of your chart, but it's not a bad idea to look back at October, November, December of that 2005 just to see, what was going on.
I didn't have an iPhone then. How am I going to look back at my pictures?
Exactly.
How do you have such
Facebook?
Oh yeah. 2005 is a total Facebook era.
I think that was kind of close to the beginning of Facebook in my life.
Oh, it definitely, for me too. Wow. You have a crazy accurate memory, Adam. That's impressive.
We were not even at BlackBerry phones yet, were we? In 2005?
Actually, in 2005,
probably.
I might have been using like a Motorola. That might have been my Razor day.
So we didn't have pagers where we said 911, call me. Did you guys have those? I had them in high school. I don't know if you guys.
Sorry, you're too old.
Okay.
I missed the pagers. Yeah.
I had my metallic pink Razor.
I just beat this very difficult level in James Bond GoldenEye. Text me, it's an emergency. Page me. I'm paging you. Call my house phone. I could just call you too, but no, I'm paging. Okay, well, Sun square Pluto on October 22nd. This is, oops, let me get it right. There we go. Sun square Pluto on October 22nd. I feel like this is another really important moment for understanding that change of direction for Pluto that we were talking about earlier. But what do you guys think about this one?
Alexandra, you lead us off.
Well, I think this is, we talked about this time of the year and how we go from sort of the light half of the year to the dark. And I think it's interesting, and people struggle to like feel how Libra is a part of that, because I think most people associate Scorpio with that part of the year. But the entire spooky month of October is Libra season. How can it be?
Mhm.
And I've been thinking about that a lot, about how Libra really feels like the public image of everyone's breaking out their sweaters and it's like cozy weather and the pumpkin spice lattes. Exactly. But what's happening is that there's a chasm opening underfoot, in a way that's going to take us to the underworld. That's going to take us into that darkness, into the stuff that we all kind of associate with that. And this, I mean, really kicks off right here as the sun squares Pluto and then immediately enters Scorpio, which Pluto and Scorpio have a special relationship. They just have a lot of synastry, their energy fields and their archetypes. So there's, again, just this feeling of like increasing as the month goes on, the slow trod and eventual plunging into the darkness archetypally. And this contact really, I feel like, sends us off.
Yeah.
I love that. I saw this kind of in context with that previous full moon, and I was hinting at maybe like a little bit of aggression toward our ambitions, and I wonder if something about this Sun square Pluto is a bit of a reckoning around that. Like, are we dealing with the consequences of possible rash actions, putting all rules aside and driving straight forward? That was really coming up for me. I think from a, more glass half full type of view, this could also ask us how those ambitions are transforming us. How are our goals becoming realities? And I can't help but feel, with Mars in the mix, like a little bit of pressure here, a little bit of pressure to do what's right. Are we having pressure from our own inner voice? Are we feeling pressure from leadership? These are some things that came up for me around Sun square Pluto.
I love that you connected it back to the full moon, because you see that the moon and Mars are together again. So it's like the moon kind of goes from a Mars ruled sign back into that embodied space, bringing those things to fruit here in the material.
Yeah, like sometimes what I like to do when I see a square is think about what kind of relationships the planets that rule the signs have with each other on an abstract or archetypal level, right? So what I think is interesting, though, is that here you could actually say that what Libra and Capricorn have in common is Saturn.
Yeah.
I'm like, oh, that's an interesting way of looking at it, where we don't always think of the sun in Libra as ruthless. Like pretty much nobody, when you first learn astrology, would think, oh, the sun in Libra, ruthless. No, Capricorn, yeah, sure. You would think, oh, Capricorn's so ruthless, they'll do anything to get to their goal, and so forth. But one of the shadows of Libra can be, let's call it like and I think I actually used this phrase last time. It's like a velvet glove over an iron hand. And so, and I'm just saying this is a shadow that's there in Libra because of the Saturnian exaltation, and Saturn's dark side obviously can be things like control. In Libra, that can be cloaked in something like perfectionism, right? So you have like an ideal that's beautiful and lofty, and you could even say, you could convince yourself that it's noble. Well, I think if you think about like the ruthlessness of a character like Kevin Spacey in House of Cards, or Robin Wright Penn, who played his wife. That kind of, looks like it's like a veneer of civilized, refined behavior, but there are designs, there are plots, there are plans behind the surface, are very calculated. There's perfectly drawn lines and angles being formed. I think a little bit about that as a dark side of this transit. I think there's other potentials too, like the potential to transform a situation through emotional sensitivity and like useful diplomacy or something like that. One of the dark sides could also be that we're starting to see something very political, very calculated, and sort of darker than it appears on the surface. I expect to see, personally, this really brings to my mind stuff that's happening probably close to the election in the collective, right?
Right.
Just political gamesmanship is kind of what I'm getting at. But a more constructive version of this would be like with Mars and the moon and Cancer involved. It would be sort of like when your plan needs a dose of greater sensitivity or care or emotional intelligence added. It can't just be a purely rational or like calculated, ambitious move. There are greater emotional realities and truths and care and concern and nurturing and things like that that need to somehow come into the equation.
That's such a good point. I think you kind of, to your point about ruthlessness, I'm thinking also about Mars in detriment there. And that's a part of why, whereas Mars is exalted in Capricorn. So these three signs also have something martial in common, though it's different. It's not that they're sharing a Mars expression. There's something disjointed and sharp there.
Right. It's like, yeah, that's a great point. I love that. By the way, I'm still waiting for you to drop a ballerina into. I need that again. I kept trying to repeat it. And I ended up sending people to weird places. I couldn't remember.
I'll write it down for you.
Anyway, so yeah, but Sun Pluto, obviously, like on a super basic level, the paternal karma, leaders, fathers, anyone that acts as like a head of state or whatever can go through that process of transformation. And also one of the great things about Sun Pluto is just the illumination of unconscious material. It's like it just catalyzes some ability to bring things up from a more subterranean space into the light of awareness or something like that.
Yeah, that's a through line to our point about working with this Plutonian, like Pluto in the last degree of Capricorn thing. This is the last time. By the time the sun comes around to conjoin with Pluto, Pluto will be in Aquarius. So if you have any unresolved dad stuff from the past 16 years, for example, or claiming of personal agency or stepping into that ambition and power, these are good times for that on the positive as well.
Yeah, great.
Hear, hear.
Our final segment for the day is the 28th through the 31st, a tough end of the month. I will let Whitney, do you want to start us off here? Anything that comes to your mind during these last couple days of the month?
Yeah, I'm thinking about this chronologically, of course, here. So what we have on the 28th there, thank you, little arrow, is Venus square Saturn. And, of course, Venus here in Sagittarius does lack dignity, but like we've covered, she's in a lot better place than she was before in Scorpio. And we have both planets in Jupiter sign. So it's just not quite as heavy. That said, this feels really melancholic to me. I think that we're taking some of this back to the beginning of the month when these planets were engaged in a trine. And so there's a little bit of an echo that's happening with this square. And so if we were feeling at the beginning of the month with the eclipse, some of these feelings for yearning, I think that a lot of that might be coming back up here as a desire for more. And a really potent example that I visualized was like, we're left outside the gates and we are on the outside looking in. And so what do we do with that? How does that make us feel? I don't know. In Jupiter signs and with Venus now in Sag, maybe we're just going to jump the gates, and maybe that's what happens, right? But that really came up for me with that particular transit. we've also got, and I don't know, maybe this would be a good time to let you all in as well to share Venus Saturn, but this is also obviously happening just before Mercury opposes Uranus, and Mercury is trining Neptune. This is happening on the 30th and the 31st. And actually, this is where that Mercury is trining Neptune. We have another grand water trine forming with Mars that will actually exact in the very beginning of November. But like something that came up for me with this is like, I got an image of the Four of Cups, right, in the tarot. And I wonder if with Mercury opposing Uranus and this grand water trine forming, if we're not recognizing kind of what we've been ignoring in our consciousness, like that shifting of a mindset, and or fear of exposure, like I think there's a risk here of maybe becoming fascinated or enchanted with a shiny object and escaping reality as well. So that was kind of like word vomit about all of this at the end of the month that just, it's a little melancholic, a little murky for Mercury. Oh, look, and there we have the Four of Cups. Thank you for the visual, Adam.
I like that you brought it up. It's such a great association with the idea of there being something that is offered, and are we somehow closing ourselves down to it, which feels like a very complainy Saturn in Pisces, like not accepting the joy that Venus is bringing on through a superior square. Like, here I'm here with Jupiterian love, and and you can see, I just feel like, oh, there's Saturn in Pisces being like, I'm like, I'm sad, or I'm whatever. I just like, that's a great association with a Venus Saturn square, especially considering Venus's position in Sag. And some of the other things you said, I think, connect nicely as well. But I just thought everyone, if they didn't know the Four of Cups, there's what you were talking about. Let me put the
That's so beautiful. I thought, again, some parallel thinking, because when I see Sun Pluto stuff, like, to me, that is the hero's journey. And the closing square of that is kind of like the moment where you return changed in the hero's journey. So you found out that this whole other world and this whole other calling exists, and you had this epic experience, and then you return home changed. And to me, that kind of spoke to the Saturn in Pisces with the Venus in Sagittarius. It's like the longing for that adventure that you had, the big world. We think a little bit about Bilbo and the Shire.
Yes.
And it's like Saturn saying, no, you can't escape. You have to come back home and integrate the things you've learned back into your daily life. You have to return changed. And Venus is just sitting here kind of romanticizing about, like, I don't need this. I could just go back on the road. I don't have to be here in my dumb old house with my silly family. I want to go back on the open road. So that kind of was that tension, that very natural tension. It kind of showed up to me here with that too.
Yeah, Venus.
I think Alex will be proud that we brought Lord of the Rings into the conversation.
Yeah, he will absolutely be thrilled. Yeah. Anytime.
Sorry, I interrupted you, Adam.
No, you're fine. I like the Venus-Saturn moment as also anything Venusian. I mean, obviously you have the death of Venusian things, right? That's like a dark, heavy symbolism where you again, death card, almost never literal, right? It's like a figurative death, but that kind of Venus here is reaching a point of greater maturity. The encounter of Venus and Saturn in things like mortality or painful events, especially in love and relationships. It might have to do with the pleasure body and refinements of how we understand pleasure, how we pursue it. Do we even allow ourselves to pursue it? Things like that. I think of Venus Saturn also as like that. I think it was a Frank Sinatra song, Autumn of Our Years. It's like late life love, Venus Saturn. Or Venus Saturn is kind of like the the wine that takes 100 years to reach its perfect moment or something. So things that are of good Venusian quality often also take time. And so when you think about Libra, a sign that is co-ruled by Venus and Saturn, I also think about like whatever Libra is asking us to mature, however Libra is asking us to grow up, grow wiser, grow into something refined, this idea of crystallized insight or wisdom from the South Node. Well, this is a great inflection point to actually be sort of gathering some of those insights or lessons from the eclipse, right? Because this is the co-rulers of the eclipse getting into a conversation with one another. And I think that this is like Venus overcoming Saturn is important here, because this is not a moment where Saturn wins, I don't think.
I agree.
It just doesn't feel that way. And Saturn is also in Venus's exaltation.
Yeah.
The benefics, although they're opposed to one another, have rulership over Saturn by domicile and exaltation. So I feel like this is a moment where there's something that's being crystallized, but it might be quite beautiful. And maybe it's a little like melancholic, or maybe there's a little element of like the pain that was behind the growth or something, but a little bittersweet maybe. But I like this moment for Venus and Saturn.
I think it actually reminds me, Ashley shared the sweetest picture of your daughters creating like a beautiful little poultice on the tree branch that was recently cut.
Right, yeah.
And during the past couple months of astrology, the like T-square business was so hard for people with Sagittarius placements, because that T-square for them was a grand cross. So I've seen so many clients with like a Sagittarius moon or something for the past couple months were really hard with all that mutable stuff. And so this Venus coming through feels like a little poultice, like that little balm on the owie. That's just going to be like,
I love that.
There's nice things here too.
Yeah. Oh, for sure. It's interesting to me. I can't help now but like stare at the moon and like, look at this. The moon will be configured to the 4 planets in the mutable signs around that time too, in Virgo.
Yeah. It's crazy how significant. I wouldn't have even noticed it if I hadn't lived it. And now it's like, oh no, the moon is going to be so significant over the next few months.
Oh my gosh. Yeah. Well, we have like the other thing that I wanted to say something about, and I want to get Whitney, wasn't it you who said that Mercury, is Mars Uranus, that you compared to swashbuckling Johnny Depp in Pirates?
Yes.
But like, I really am curious.
The water trine, God. Yeah. To Neptune and Mars.
Yeah, we have this water trine coming in as Mercury opposes Uranus. What do you think about that, Whitney?
Well, I
just put you on the spot.
No, I love it. I was kind of hinting at this before, right? And I feel like there are a couple of different ways that we could go here. And the grand water trine to me feels like, on a positive note, we're in a dream world. It's like mysticism and depth of spirit, right? And at the same time, opposing Mercury. I mean, okay, here we are again, like Mercury, Uranus, we're gleaning unexpected insights, but that's what the astrology is saying, right? So is there a deeper connection to the oracle here, right? That we are gleaning these insights from our depth of spirit and what we have been, searching for in our journey. I think that's the really positive side. And I think that depending on how this falls in your chart, right? And from a collective perspective, this is really setting us up for the election. I think there could be a chance here of like escapism, maybe some subversion, like secrets revealed, etc. So that's what's really coming up for me, if you're putting me on the spot, but I prepared. So
Yeah. I am so like, I wanted to hear what you guys thought because that Uranus will be on my ascendant. So that Mercury Uranus will be across my ascendant descendant with this big
Oh.
watery trine. So I'm like, this is one of the
Always
ones
wants a free read.
just,
You know, Adam.
what do you think? What's going to happen to me, Whitney?
Adam, the Oracle is speaking. Another plug for your book.
Right. Hey, you know what I find really like super interesting about this though is that I really liked what you said about it being deep and mystical, and that kind of surprising, unexpected Mercury Uranus dynamic feels, I don't know, so much less like it just seems to me with all the water in the air and Neptune and so forth, like it's not a fender bender. Or at the very least, it's a mystical fender bender. If anything's going to happen that's sort of like disruptive and kind of jarring, you know, and I use the fender bender as an example, this is one that has a lot of emotional depth and power behind it. Where, like you said, if you're someone who pays attention to things, you pay attention to astrology, this isn't going to miss, and this probably served to really deepen your instincts, your intuition, and maybe give you really valuable feedback. So even if there's a little surprise around this moment, I just feel like what you said about the mystical depth of the moment is going to be profound enough to probably provide some silver lining, as big grand trines do, right? They're all trines, and I think the silver lining might be kind of mystical and a little heavier on an emotional level, but it's there.
Absolutely. Love it.
Yeah, I feel like from a mundane perspective, at this point, we have Mars entering into that opposition with Pluto, but there's so much stuff going on with the outer planets too, right? Like, so Uranus and Pluto are kind of in a trine. They're both sextiling Neptune. There's so much big stuff. It to me, when you're talking about like the mystical, you didn't say fog, but that's what I was thinking of. Like, it feels like atmospheric tension and pressure at the end of October. No surprise. We know what's going on. We know it's going to be coming. But I think there's, you know, I like to be optimistic. Like, I don't think we need to always be pessimistic all the time. We need to be realistic that the atmosphere is going to be quite electric, quite obscured, quite dense with just really inflammatory rhetoric. And the, you know, there are things that we can do, namely being aware of it, right? But like to de-escalate that, to know that that's not everything that's happening, that's not everything that's happening in your life. And that is kind of like an atmospheric sort of, I'm just imagining like those electrical storms kind of going on around that time.
And there could literally be like seriously literal transmissions of like water, like, or like appearances of water. It's like something that always like, I'm always like, well, let's not take it too literally. And then a grand water trine comes through and there's the biggest flood that's ever happened. And
yeah,
you know, it's crazy how the literalness of the water can sometimes actually show up.
Oh boy, we better start sandbagging her.
You know, it's like it's funny to me how the water, like Mars in Cancer went over Mercury, my second house ruler, my fifth house ruler. So I had a daughter with a sprained ankle, and then there was a bill because our dish, what do you call it? The disposal. What are the disposal?
Disposal?
Yeah, right. So disposal in the sink. Yes. Okay. So I couldn't remember the name of it.
Garbage? No,
the
I don't know
disposal.
either.
Isn't that what it's called?
Garbage disposal? Yeah, I think so.
Yeah.
You don't put garbage in there.
You don't put your hand in there. I tell my kids are learning to wash. Do not put your hand in there. So yeah, like I had to pay for a new garbage disposal in the sink, right as you know, Mars in Cancer was on Mercury. I'm like, that's stupid literal. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
What I always take as a challenge, and I don't like, it doesn't always work, but is if I go, what does that garbage disposal represent? Like, is there trash I need to take out? Is there something that I'm unable to take out? Like I start looking at the literal manifestations in terms of other like psychological symbolism. And sometimes you can find interesting correlations going on in your life.
That's going to be so true with these moon things going on. You talk about this in your lectures and your classes as like 2 points of the mandala meeting, the symbolism somewhere in the circle touching. And that is really how it feels. Like I told you, when the moon entered Cancer this past week, it was like a balloon. I was holding a balloon for my son, and it hit my head and popped on my face, and I had a big red angry mark on my face. And then my son almost fell, so I lurched to catch him, and I stepped onto a picture frame with like family pictures and broke the glass. Like I was like,
God, yeah,
okay, this is not me. This is the mandala touching itself. Like there's some physical thing happening here. So I think that kind of symbolism is going to play into things a lot.
Yeah.
In the next few months.
Whitney, anything you want to leave us with before we sign off today? And same thing for you, Alexandra.
Oh gosh, just that, hang in there, folks. We've got a bit of a watery, emotional ride, and we are, just buckling up for the rest of, especially Mars and Cancer season. I feel like, isn't that funny? Like, we have talked probably 12 different times today about Mars and Cancer. It feels so potent, and we probably will continue to in November as well. That's all I've got, except, thanks again. And I just love this. Honestly, we could keep going. I know we're already at like an hour and 40 minutes, but I could keep going. This is so great.
For sure. And if you guys want to connect with Whitney, you can connect with her at astroarcana.com, where you can book a reading with her, and on Instagram, astro.arcana.astrology, where you can follow all of her latest posts. I will say, Whitney, after you mentioned us talking all about Mars and Cancer, one of my favorite parts about Mars and Cancer transits is that you have really super reactive, emotional people in the comments section telling you that you have no fucking idea what Mars and Cancer represents.
So fun.
That's your favorite part?
I just think it's funny because I'm like, but you're doing it.
Case in point.
I know, exactly. No, we try I think we have done a good job. Honestly, I think we've done a good job at saying how amazing this placement can be, and we understand why it's difficult. But it's easy to talk about because this is really a planet in Cancer that like brings change, and it brings good changes, but sometimes they're just a little charged, Alexandra, what are you last thoughts before we go?
No, I mean, I agree. It's fun to watch the comments, and there are a lot of really awesome ways that Mars and Cancer can present natally or mundane. I've been putting some of that on my Instagram, so you can check that out. But I just want to say that, like it does look kind of tough, and it's so easy to, like we talked about a few times, use astrology and get really anxious and feel this escalation. Let's all kind of keep that in mind, that the rhetoric and the atmosphere is one thing, and we can retreat from that when we need to and care for ourselves. I think that's a big lesson of the Mars and Cancer, is like defending your space to rest and to care for yourself, even if it feels radical or a departure from who you have normally been.
Oh, such an important reminder right now.
Such good advice. Yeah. I read an essay last week from a mentor of mine, Jeffrey Cornelius, who recently passed. Yeah. And in his essay, he was talking about the fact that in order to maintain some sense of cultural or social legitimacy, we sort of cloak astrology in this objective pseudoscientific language. And his point was always to insist that what we're working with are signs and symbols, and our poetic use and interpretation of them is at the heart of what we do. And so, our goal is always, my goal, our goal, all three of us, is always to present you with multiple poetic possibilities, not so much to tell you what's going to happen, but to give you ways of understanding things as they unfold that are useful. If in that process, it's making you anxious, it's not going to offend me. It's not going to offend any of us. It's not going to offend the gods if you need to just not listen for a minute, especially during eclipse seasons when things are really intense, or if you're going through a particularly intense period of your life. Take what nourishes you and set aside the anxiety, because this is not some kind of objective, like causal model that's just blindly and mechanistically laying out things that you're meant to suffer through, right? It is a system of signs and omens and patterns that we look into as a way of helping guide ourselves through different seasons of life. This is a season of life in October that we're all going to go through and experience. But we can do it together on a channel like this, and we can reflect in different poetic ways. That's why I have two wonderful co-hosts to help me reflect and bounce light off the jewel at different angles. And we hope that you'll share your stories with us. If you have a story to share, you can use the hashtag grabbed at Nightlight, hashtag grabbed, and then tell us your story in the comment section, or email us grabbed@nightlightastrology.com, and we will bring your story into our next episodes. Because when other people hear what you're going through and how you reflected and responded, what you learned, what the internal meaning was for you, and some random event that was so like off the radar, it's like, wow, would you believe this? You know, I saw Rahu in the clouds and then avoided gunfire outside. Like, that's crazy. We love hearing your stories.
Yeah.
Anyway, please do share them. You want to hook up with Alexandra for a reading? 9livesastrology.com is the place to find her work and book a reading with her. And if you would like to connect with Alexandra in terms of her regular astrology content on Instagram, it's also 9livesastrology. And I also really enjoyed a post that you did exploring some of the archetypal symbolism of Mars in Cancer in relation to Stephen King. That was because I love him. I use his chart in some of my classes like that. I loved that post. And I also loved the way that you've been working archetypes in relation to things like art and stuff like that. And Whitney too, both just great follows on Instagram. So make sure that you guys follow them. If you want insight into how some of these things are affecting you because you feel a little anxiety, you are in good hands with these two ladies who will just give a lot of care to you and where you're at if you want to look at these things in an actual reading too. So check that out. That is it for this month. We will be back next month for more stories to share and things to reflect on. So we hope that you have a great month, and we will see you all again in November. Bye, everyone.
Bye.
Hey, everyone. I'm glad that you're sticking around to hear more about the Year 1 program that's coming up. The program starts on November 16th of this fall, and I am here today to tell you all that the program includes and why I think you really like it if you're thinking about studying astrology. So a few practical details about the course as well. The class begins November 16th, as I mentioned, but it takes place on Saturdays from 12 to about 2 or 3 p.m. Eastern Time. So that's 11 to 2 Central, and typically classes are about 2 hours long. Sometimes they run over with Q&A and discussion, but you can always plan for about 2 hours and you won't miss any of the actual lecture content for the day. You may have to duck out a little early if Q&A or discussion is extending. Sometimes it does, which is why we say between 2 and 3 hours, but typically it's around 2. All of the classes are recorded, so if you can't attend live, you are more than welcome to watch the recordings at your own pace and on your own time. You have lifetime access to the recordings, and everything is housed on a student website. I want to actually give you just a little preview of what that student website looks like. So I am going to open up my own version of Thinkific, which is the platform that we use. So here's some of my courses. These are all the Nightlight courses I teach. You can see on the page. But I'm going to tune into, let's go to Nightlight 28, which is the section that began in June of 2024. So here you're going to see that we have orientation instructions, course information, class links, and calendar. Everything that you need to know how to access the course is there. And you'll have a version of this in your own panel that you get set up with when you enroll. And then our lessons are laid out. So lesson 1, we have the video, the audio, the slides, the transcript. We have the Q&A box transcript so you can see what people were saying in the chat box during class. We have flashcards. We have a workbook. We have planet and sign glyph flashcards. We have bonus material, videos that we like from YouTube that we link you to. Say, check this video out, check that video out. They go along with some of the things we talked about in class. So every lesson has material for you to go as far as you want with, but the main thing is the video, audio, slides, transcript, etc. are all listed there so that you can download and watch it on your own time if you can't attend live. Again, the live classes do happen on Saturdays for this cohort, starting November 16th. That is our first day of class. And then going forward, it always meets on Saturdays, and we give you the class schedule to map out, and the breaks that we have, the study sessions that we have, everything's mapped out on the class calendar for you. So those are just a few practical details that, just to kind of start us off with. So I'm going to take you over to the website, which is nightlightastrology.com. And I'm going to share with you some information about the program and sort of walk you through what it includes and what you can expect. So it is an almost year-long program. We typically finish between 10 and 11 months out of the year. It can depend a little bit on some of my teaching and scheduling, because sometimes I teach at conferences and it may delay some of our modules by a week or something like that. But it's typically around 10 to 11 months that the program lasts. So we call it our first year program. At Nightlight, we have a program for absolute beginners. You may want to check that out if you are like brand spanking new. That would be 8 to 10 hours of content that's really meant to set you up for the first year course. We sort of assume that if you're coming into the first year program, you already know a little bit about astrology. For example, you have some familiarity with the signs, planets, and houses. Maybe you know what aspects are, but you want to learn more about what they are. But if you are really at the very total entry level space, then try Astrology for Beginners. And when you take that, you could do that right away and then join the first year course in November, and you'd be perfectly set up for it. But anyhow, in this program, over the course of about a year, we work through 30 lessons that I lead. And those lessons are all 2 to 3 hours each, including lecture, a little break, and a Q&A portion where we open up for people to come on mic and camera and ask questions and have an interactive discussion about the material for the day. The program is broken into modules that cover a variety of topics in ancient Hellenistic astrology. That is the earliest era of horoscopic astrology. And so if you don't know a lot about the different schools of astrology, Hellenistic astrology is going to be the kind of astrology that you see a lot of astrologers practicing nowadays. It's become more popular in the last 30 years or so. And that is due to the fact that a lot of ancient texts with some of the original techniques of horoscopic astrologers were recently translated into the English language, and it's created this renaissance in terms of the use of ancient approaches to astrology. I have a background in modern psychological, archetypal, and evolutionary astrology, and so of course I bring those things to the table, but the course is primarily focused on the excavation of ancient techniques and the spiritual philosophy that ancient astrologers also espoused. The closest thing that I can tell you to what that looks like is, ask this question: do you resonate with the philosophy that you hear me take on my YouTube channel? If so, then you're going to love this course in terms of its philosophical and spiritual approach, because the spiritual approach to astrology that I teach is really at the heart of the program. And that's a big part of my life. I approach astrology from a spiritual standpoint. It doesn't belong to one religion or one particular school of thought, but you will hear me talking about things like the soul, the belief in the transmigration of the soul. You'll hear me talk about the need to be soul-centered in our client approach to counseling in astrology. You'll hear me have an appreciation for psychological dimensions of astrology, but also ancient astrology is really very, very good at developing your predictive capacity. We talk about what kinds of predictions are appropriate, how to make appropriate predictions, how to be the right kind of astrologer for our clients without inducing any fear. So there's a lot of care that goes into the development of this craft. But ancient astrology is really amazing when it comes to honing your predictive abilities. And then what you'll find is in this program, there's also a pretty significant emphasis on the psychological dimensions and client care. Anyhow, we go into the roots of ancient Hellenistic astrology and its techniques in this program, and the 30 classes are broken into modules. We work through the history and philosophy. We work through planets, houses, signs, aspects, essential and accidental dignities, and then we get into approaches to the delineation of natal charts. And then at the end of the program, almost a third of the program is dedicated to live client readings, where you're going to see me meet with a person and apply what we've been studying for an hour-long reading. We take a break, we come back, and then we workshop. How did I do that? Why did I make these choices? How did I handle this or that came up in the reading? And it becomes easily the favorite part for most students of the entire program, because by that point, you've got so much theory that you're really ready to see it put into action. We alternate those live client practice sessions with hands-on practice where students get to bring chart questions into class that we work on. And that's also something that most people really love. A lot of people will look at the curriculum and say, well, I already know planets, houses, and signs and aspects and dignities. But not if you haven't studied Hellenistic astrology, because the approach that ancient astrologers had to these topics is vastly different from the approach that modern astrologers take. So you will be, in a sense, relearning basic things in a brand new way. And I think a much more enriching, deep, and philosophically clear way. It's really nice to know the why behind things. This program and Hellenistic astrology in general is very good at helping you understand the why behind everything that we do. Also, it's really important to participate when you study astrology in a living lineage. So one of the reasons I don't let people jump ahead to my second or third year programs is because I want you to be entrained to a lineage, a particular way of doing things that comes from an astrologer who has a very living, busy, active practice and who has had teachers themselves. I think that's important for astrological learning. That's the model that my own learning take, and so that's what I really want students to take away from my programs. Anyhow, so all of that aside, the second year program focuses, after we build our understanding of the basic delineation techniques of birth charts, in year 2, we move into timing techniques, which is all about when the karma of a birth chart is going to be active and expressing itself throughout the course of a lifetime. That's year 2. Year 3 focuses on the development of counseling skills at a much deeper level. And then we also have a 1-year horary program, which is about the development of a very specific predictive technique that can be a really amazing tool to add to your kit. That is 4 years worth of training programs that we have. However, I want to mention that many people take our classes just for the sake, purely for the sake of their own personal growth. Taking these programs is very much like being taught how to utilize a technology that for yourself will be deeply useful for the rest of your life, and maybe for close friends or family members around you. Many people come through our programs taking that benefit away. We'll study through all 4 years of our programs with no intention of being professional. This is their hobby. This is a spiritual tool that will have it will pay dividends over a long period of time. However, many people without the intention to practice come into our courses and discover that they're actually good at it and may end up reading for other people part-time. And then there are students who are deeply, intensely motivated to practice for other people. And it is not that our programs really make those people successful. Our programs contribute to your development, but it really is that some people have a calling to practice professionally. And these programs are designed to give you all the tools you need to develop that confidence and to develop a really coherent set of tools and to entrain yourself to a lineage, which you can also develop your own unique style out of. So those are some of the kinds of people that take our programs, you might say. So the 30 classes on the year are then broken into modules. And in between modules, we have 2 course directors who are present in all of the classes, and they lead breakout tutoring sessions where you can come in and review or ask questions about the module that we've just completed, which is usually anywhere between 2 and 3 classes each. So those breakout study sessions led by our tutors are outside of the 30 classes and very useful. A lot of people like to attend those because they also offer opportunity for community and just lively conversation. We also have 12 online webinar classes led by guest teachers that we host throughout the year. Those are free, and if you can't make them live, they're all uploaded into your student folder. You also have an interactive group forum discussion staffed with tutors who typically respond to questions that you have about the material within 24 hours. So if you can't attend a tutoring session or you just have a random question on a Tuesday night, you can pop it in there and you'll get an answer. We also have a ton of bonus material, optional quizzes, flashcards, tons of supplemental material that is there to help people go as deeply as they want. We have a reading list that is expansive. And that reading list, we don't expect anyone to accomplish. It's more so a resource that we give you saying, here, if you want to know all the things I've read, if you want to know all the things that I love, if you want to know all the things I recommend, here's a master list of everything for each lesson. You could go PhD level if you wanted to and read thousands and thousands of pages, or you might find that there's just one extra book that looks really interesting and you want to pick it up. But we pride ourselves on making sure you have a ton of resources. You have lifetime access to all the class recordings. You can email our staff or me throughout the year with questions, and my staff will also defer to me in the case that they don't know the answer to a question. So that is what the program includes. It starts November 16th. If you would like to join, at the bottom between now and October 15th, our early bird payments are available. So that saves you some money off the cost of the course. There is a 12-month installment plan that is cheaper than our normal plan, a one-time payment that's significantly cheaper than our normal one-time payment. So you get these little sales that we do until October 15th. We also have need-based tuition assistance. So if you are someone who would like to take this program, but you are on a fixed or tight budget, we have an application there. Click apply now. Just tell us what you need. We give a range. We say between this dollar amount and this dollar amount, what can you spend? And then we set you up with a plan for that tuition number per month. And that is available for anyone. We ask people to apply early because those spots are limited, but we are really accommodating. We try to make sure that nobody's priced out of a spiritual education. Like, this topic should be very accessible for people because I believe that the divine is speaking through the sky, and like anyone should have access to understanding what it's saying, right? So anyway, that is a bit about the program. I hope that this has been useful for you. If there are any questions you have, you can look over the curriculum content on the page, on the year one page. There's more information there. Check out the FAQ section for more questions. Email us info@nightlightastrology.com. And I hope to see some of you in class soon. I think this is going to be a really powerful program because it's also starting right as Pluto's moving into Aquarius. And within the year, we're going to have a Uranus-Pluto trine with Uranus in Gemini. These Aries signatures and the connection between Uranus and Pluto make for a very powerful year to advance our understanding of astrology. So it's a great election year for studying, and I hope to see some of you in class soon.